Hey, this is Chris Allingham with the Virtual Weber Bullet. Today I'm going to show you how to carve a tri-tip roast. Here's an uncooked tri-tip. It's a triangular shaped piece of meat. It's not symmetrical. They tend to be longer on one side than on the other. This roast has a seam of fat that runs down the center. I'm going to draw a black line down that seam, and you'll notice that the grain is different on each side of that black line. And when this roast is cooked, we're going to want to slice across the grain. So it's important to understand the direction the grain is running on the particular piece of meat that you're cooking. To the right of that black line, you'll notice the grain is running vertically. It's running up and down. Whereas on the left side of that line, it's running on an angle. In fact, toward the end of the roast, the grain is curving back toward the right. So when this roast has been cooked, what I'm going to do is cut it in half right down that black line, and then I'm going to cut each of those two pieces separately. I'm going to carve the right piece across the grain, as you can see on these blue lines, and for the piece on the left, I'm going to cut it across the grain along the blue lines you see here. Let's take a look at the cooked roast. So here's the cooked roast in the same orientation that you saw it before cooking, and here you can see where that seam of fat was, the black line in the diagram. Now I'm going to cut the roast in half along that seam, and starting with the piece that's on the left, I'm going to cut across the grain. I'm also going to hold the knife at a slight angle. That's called cutting on the bias. That does help produce a more tender piece of meat after it's been sliced. Now, setting that piece aside, I'll turn my attention to the piece that was on the right. I'll turn that 90 degrees, and now I'll also slice this piece across the grain, and with the knife tilted slightly toward my left, I'll cut on the bias. So that's all there is to carving a tri-tip. The main takeaway here is that you should carefully look at the grain of the meat before you cook it, and then consider cutting that roast in half after cooking so that you can carve each portion separately across the grain on the bias.